A wildfire was closing around an orphanage, and 14 children had no safe road out. A former Navy SEAL arrived with his German Shepherd, but the fire had already trapped the building. Then the dog found a hidden passage beneath the old chapel, the only chance the children had left. But when a little girl ran back for medicine, the dog followed her into the smoke. Moments later, the soldier saved the girl, but his dog was trapped behind a wall of fire. Now he had to choose. Save the dog who kept him alive, or save the children waiting in the dark. After this story, tell us what you feel in the comments, and please like and subscribe to help us write more powerful stories. The morning in Kestrel Hollow looked too peaceful to be trusted. Sunlight lay thin and pale across the edge of black fern forest, touching the old pine trunks without warming them. The sky was a clean northern blue, the kind that made tourists speak softly and locals look twice. Nothing moved except the dust along the dirt road and the dry needles shifting under a wind too weak to deserve a name. At the edge of that forest stood a cabin made of weathered cedar, gray at the seams and stubborn as the man who lived inside it. Archer Morrow knelt beside his kitchen table with an old rescue radio opened in pieces before him. He was 39 years old, a former Navy SEAL, and for a while after that a mountain search and rescue volunteer. He stood about 6 feet tall, lean and compact, with the kind of strength that did not announce itself until something heavy needed moving or someone needed carrying. His face was clean-shaven, close-cut and sharp, showing a square jaw and defined cheekbones. His dark brown hair was trimmed in a military style, though a little longer than regulation now, as if discipline had loosened but never left. His light skin had been roughened by northern cold and long winters. His eyes were gray-blue, quiet, watchful, and older than the rest of him. He wore what he almost always wore, an old olive-gray tactical combat shirt softened by years of washing, frayed lightly at the cuffs and shoulders, worn earth-brown and moss-green combat pants with scuffed knees and sagging cargo pockets, old military work boots, and a scratched military watch that still kept better time than his sleep. On the porch, Briggs lifted his head. Briggs was a male German Shepherd, 4 or 5 years old, yellow-black in coat, built like a working-line dog rather than a show animal. He had a deep chest, sturdy legs, upright ears, and amber-brown eyes that seemed to understand silence better than most people understood speech. Around his neck was an old brown leather collar, cracked at the edges and darkened where rain and years had touched it. He had once been trained for search work. He still carried himself like every fallen branch, every faint scent, every trembling leaf was a sentence waiting to be read. Archer heard the soft scrape of claws on wood. "Deer?" he asked without looking up. Briggs did not answer with a bark. That was the first wrong thing. Normally, if it was a deer, Briggs would give a low huff of professional disappointment, as though insulted that wild animals continued to behave like wild animals. If it was a raccoon, he would stand, offended but hopeful. If it was nothing, he would return to his spot beneath the porch rail and resume his solemn duty of guarding a man who pretended not to need guarding. But now Briggs stood completely still. Archer looked through the open door. The dog faced south. South meant the old black fern trail. South meant the dry creek bed. South meant if a person followed the forest road far enough, St. Alder home, the orphanage tucked among the pines where children tied ribbons to a crooked old cedar and called it a wishing tree. Archer set down the screwdriver. The radio on the table gave a faint burst of static. "Black fern fire remains under partial containment," a dispatcher said through the crackle. "No evacuation order for Southern Ridge residences at this time. Repeat, no evacuation order." The signal dissolved into noise. Archer stared at the radio, then at Briggs. "See," he said. "Contained." Briggs turned his head slowly and looked at him. It was a small look, No drama, no thunder, just those amber eyes holding him in place. Archer felt something old move under his ribs. He had seen that look before in collapsed snowfields, in flooded culverts, once in the remains of a hunting cabin where Briggs had found an old man still breathing beneath a fallen beam. The dog did not look that way when he was curious. He looked that way when someone was running out of time. Archer pushed himself up and stepped onto the porch. The air smelled wrong. Not smoke exactly. Smoke would have been honest. This was hotter and thinner, a dry, resinous scent. Pine sap warming too quickly, soil losing its damp memory. The forest had that held breath feeling it got before disaster decided to stop being patient. Briggs bounded down the porch steps and trotted toward the fence. "Briggs," Archer called. The dog did not stop. He moved, along the fence line, nose low, sweeping left, then right. His body stayed controlled, but his ears were rigid. At the far corner, where dry grass collected beneath the wire, Briggs lowered his head and pulled something free. He returned with it hanging gently from his teeth, a strip of pale blue ribbon. The end was blackened. Archer took it from him. For a moment the world became very small. The ribbon between his fingers, the dry wind, the dog's breath, the distant radio static from inside the cabin. He knew that ribbon. 3 days earlier he had driven past the Black Fern trailhead and seen a group of children from St. Alder home walking with 2 adults. One girl had been laughing as she tied blue ribbons to a crooked cedar near the trail, telling a smaller boy that wishes needed something to hold on to, or they would get lost in the wind. Archer had not stopped. He rarely stopped for groups of children. Children made noise in places he kept locked. He rubbed the ribbon between his thumb and forefinger. It carried the bitter scent of fresh ash. But beneath that was something sharper, medicinal, an inhaler. Archer's jaw tightened. Briggs whined once, not fear, urgency. The sound struck Archer harder than it should have. For a second, the porch vanished, the forest vanished. He was back in another country, in a building filled with heat and plaster dust, dragging 2 terrified civilians through a corridor that burned orange at the edges. Behind him, Evan Rusk had been pinned under a section of collapsed ceiling. Evan had been 32, broad-shouldered, black-haired, with a crooked grin and the calm arrogance of a man everyone trusted under fire. He had a half-inch scar over one eyebrow and a habit of joking at the worst possible times. Even trapped, even bleeding, he had looked Archer dead in the eyes and shouted, "Move, Morrow, that is an order." So Archer had moved. He had saved the civilians. Evan had not come home. The world had called Archer brave. Archer had known better. Brave men did not hear their friend's last order every night and wake with their hands clenched around empty air. Briggs nudged his hand. Archer inhaled slowly. "No," he whispered, though he was not sure whether he meant the memory, the fire, or the part of himself already reaching for the gear bag. Inside the cabin, the rescue radio crackled again. This time another voice broke through, hard and clipped. "Unit 3, confirm wind shift near southern slope. Repeat, confirm wind shift. We are seeing behavior that does not match the map." Archer stepped back inside and turned the volume higher. A woman answered over the line. Kara Wynn. Even through static, Archer knew her voice. 42 years old local fire captain, sturdy and practical, with strong shoulders. A sharp, fatigue-marked face, gray-brown eyes, and dark hair always tied low beneath her helmet. Kara was not cruel, but she had the temperament of someone who had buried mistakes and learned to distrust miracles. She wore her duty like armor, and she did not forgive recklessness, especially not her own. "Jonah says the fire is pulling wrong," Kara said over the radio. Jonah Brandt, forest ranger, wildfire behavior specialist. Lean, wiry, dry as old bark, with a weathered face and eyes that missed very little. If Jonah said a fire was acting wrong, it meant the forest itself had started lying. Archer reached for the handset. Before he could press the button, his phone buzzed on the table. Kara's name lit the screen. He stared at it as if it were a summons from a life he had escaped badly. Then he answered. "Morrow," he said. "I need a terrain read," Kara said. No greeting, no softness. Not hero work, not old war stories, a terrain read. Archer looked at Briggs, who now stood beside the wall map, nose lifted toward the paper. What happened? Blackfern jumped a drainage line. Jonah's tracking a wind channel that shouldn't exist on the current map. Some of the evacuation routes near St. Alder don't match what we have. At the name St. Alder, Briggs placed one paw against the lower corner of the map. Not randomly, not near the whole southern ridge, directly over the area where the orphanage sat. Archer went very still. Kara continued. You surveyed that back country after the slide 4 years ago. You and the dog found that missing hiker near Hollow Run. I need to know if there's an older trail or drainage cut we're not seeing. Archer's throat tightened. He could see the orphanage in his mind, though he had never gone inside. White fence, old chapel roof, children's coats on hooks near the front steps. He could also see Evan Rusk's face, ash gray in memory, saying, "Move." "I'm not active SAR anymore," Archer said. "I know. You have crews. I have crews stretched across 3 ridges and a fire that just stopped following our plan." Kara's voice lowered. "I would not call you if I had a cleaner option." That honesty was worse than pleading. Archer looked down at the ribbon. Pale blue, burned at one end, still holding the faint ghost of medicine and smoke. Briggs gave a low, breathy sound and pressed his paw harder into the map. Archer had spent nearly a year telling himself he had left rescue work because he was tired, because his knees ached in winter, because younger men and women deserved the radio channels now. All of that was partly true, but the deeper truth was simpler. He was afraid of arriving too late again. He was afraid of making the correct choice and still losing the one soul he could not bear to lose. Archer closed his eyes. In the silence, he heard the porch boards creak under Briggs' weight. He heard the radio crackle. He heard far off a dull sound like thunder where no storm lived. When he opened his eyes, Briggs was watching him, not begging, waiting. That was worse. Archer spoke into the phone. "I'll drive to the southern access and look, that's all." Kara exhaled once, sharp with relief she did not want him to hear. "Bring your radio. Stay out of the burn line unless I clear it." "I said I'll look. Morrow." "What?" "Do not make me regret calling you." Archer almost smiled. Almost. People usually regret calling me for other reasons. If you start making jokes, I'll assume the smoke already got to you. The line went dead. For one heartbeat, the cabin returned to stillness. Then Archer moved. He took the old rescue bag from beneath the bench, gloves, headlamp, trauma kit, compact axe, water, spare radio batteries, a folded topo map, and 2 smoke hoods he had never expected to use again. His hands worked quickly, remembering what his mind wished it could forget. Briggs followed each motion, tail low, ears forward. "You understand we're not going in," Archer said. Briggs blinked. "Don't give me that look." The dog gave him exactly that look. Archer grabbed his truck keys. At the door, he paused beside a small photograph tucked into the frame of the kitchen shelf. Evan Rusk grinned from the faded image. One arm slung around Archer's shoulders, both of them younger, dirtier, unbroken in ways neither had known were temporary. Archer touched the edge of the frame. "I moved," he said under his breath, "just like you told me." The cabin did not answer. Outside, Briggs was already at the truck. The old blue pickup sat beneath a pine, shedding dry needles onto its hood. Briggs jumped into the passenger seat before Archer opened the door fully, then turned and looked through the windshield toward the southern ridge. Archer climbed in and started the engine. "We're only checking the road," he said. Briggs kept staring south. The truck rolled down the dirt drive, past the fence, past the place where the blue ribbon had caught in the grass. The forest on both sides stood too still, ranks of pine like silent witnesses waiting for testimony. At the end of the drive, Archer stopped. Beyond the trees, above the southern ridge, a column of smoke rose into the sky. At first it had been pale gray. Now, as Archer watched, the center of it thickened and turned black. Not forest smoke, something else had caught. A building, fuel, treated wood. Maybe something near St. Alder. Briggs let out one low bark. Archer tightened both hands on the steering wheel. The road ahead looked empty, but it no longer felt like a road. It felt like a verdict. He shifted the truck into gear and drove toward the smoke. The road into St. Alder home had been built for Sunday visits, not evacuations. Archer Morrow's old blue pickup climbed the last stretch of gravel with Briggs rigid in the passenger seat, paws braced, amber eyes fixed beyond the windshield. Dry needles snapped beneath the tires, the forest pressed close on both sides, every pine standing too still, every branch holding its breath. By the time the orphanage came into view, the sky had turned the color of beaten copper. St. Alder home stood in a clearing below a low ridge, an old wooden building with a steep roof, white paint peeling from its trim, and a front porch sagging slightly at one corner. Beside it sat a small, unused chapel, narrow and weather-beaten, its bell tower empty. A wooden playground leaned in the yard. Beyond that were several old apple trees, their leaves curled from heat, and a white fence that looked too gentle for the day pressing against it. The place did not look like an institution. It looked like a tired boat built by hopeful hands, trying to carry wounded children across a sea that kept rising. Archer stopped the truck near the porch. Before the engine fully died, Briggs jumped down. "Stay close," Archer said. Briggs did not run. That worried Archer more. The dog moved with purpose, head low, body tight, as if every scent in the clearing had arranged itself into a warning. A cluster of children stood near the front steps with damp towels over their mouths. There were 14 of them, Archer counted automatically. Some were small enough to cling to coat sleeves. A few older ones tried to look brave and failed in different ways. At the center of them stood Maeve Hollis. Maeve was 63, small and thin, but there was nothing fragile about how she held herself. Her silver-white hair was pinned in a low bun that the wind had begun to loosen. Her wrinkled face was gentle, lined by years of worry and bedtime stories, and her tired eyes still carried a stubborn brightness. She wore a blue-gray knitted sweater beneath an old taupe-brown long coat, dark thick pants, brown cold-weather boots, and a pale cream scarf tucked close to her throat. She was speaking to the children in a calm voice, though one hand kept touching the beads at her wrist. "Eyes on me, darlings. We are not scattering like frightened chickens. Chickens make poor decisions. We are geese today. Geese move together." A tiny boy near her hiccuped. "Geese bite." "Exactly," Maeve said. "So does Miss Tessa when necessary." Beside her, Tessa Bloom held a clipboard upside down. Tessa was 28, petite and quick, with light skin, warm brown eyes, and light brown hair tied hastily into a low ponytail that was already slipping loose. She wore a cream sweater beneath a light olive quilted jacket, dark practical pants, and low brown boots. Her face showed every emotion before she could hide it, which meant fear passed across it plainly. But she stayed where she was, counting the children again and again as if numbers could become a fence. "I do not bite," Tessa said, then looked at the smallest child, "unless somebody refuses to hold hands." The child immediately grabbed another child's sleeve. Archer stepped toward them, but a sharp voice cut across the yard. "Morrow." Kara Wynne strode from the far side of the clearing, a radio clipped at her shoulder. In person, she looked even more carved by duty than she had sounded on the phone. She was 42, about 5'7", sturdy and practical, with strong shoulders under a brick-red wildfire rescue jacket marked by narrow reflective strips. A dark base thermal shirt showed beneath it. Her rescue pants were dark and scuffed, black firefighter boots dusted with ash, gloves tucked under one arm. Her angular face held fatigue like a bruise, and her gray-brown eyes were hard with focus. Her dark brown hair was tied low at the nape. She did not waste time looking pleased or displeased. "You came fast," she said. "You called like someone who hated needing to." "I did." Kara's eyes flicked to Briggs. "Dog stays under control." Briggs paused, turned his head toward her once, then kept moving. Archer almost said, "He usually controls the rest of us." He did not. The day had no room for jokes that looked too much like prayer. "What's the situation?" he asked. Kara pointed toward the drive behind the main building. "The bus can't get through. A pine came down across the main road 10 minutes before my crew arrived. We were cutting it when spot fires started jumping the ditch. North Service Trail is still technically open, but the wind is turning it into a throat." "How many kids?" 14 on site. Others were already in town for school or picked up after the advisory. Kara's mouth tightened. "We move wrong. We lose time. We wait. We lose options." A man approached from the chapel side with a folded map in one hand. Jonah Brandt was 47, a forest ranger and wildfire behavior specialist, lean and wiry as a root pulled from hard soil. His light skin was lightly weathered from years outdoors. His face was long, bony, and restrained, with short brown-gray hair and cool, observant eyes that seemed to measure everything twice. He wore a blue-gray work shirt, an olive ranger vest, brown-gray outdoor pants, and forest boots dusted with red earth. A waterproof field notebook stuck out of one vest pocket. He nodded to Archer. "Fire's moving as if there's a channel cut behind the southern slope." "There isn't one on the county maps," Kara said. Jonah tapped the folded paper. "That is what bothers me." Briggs stopped near the chapel. At first, no one noticed except Archer. The German shepherd stood before the old chapel door, nose lifted, ears rigid. He did not scratch. He did not bark. He simply stared at the wood as though someone behind it had whispered his name. Then he lowered himself until his chest nearly touched the ground and pressed his nose to the gap beneath the door. Archer felt the old current run through him again. "What is it?" Kara asked. "Not panic," Archer said, "and that's not an answer." With him, sometimes it is. Kara's eyes narrowed, but before she could respond, Briggs gave one low sound from deep in his chest and pawed the base of the chapel door. Maeve turned sharply. Her expression changed so quickly Archer almost missed it. Not fear, recognition. "That chapel has been locked since the roof leak," she said. "Any reason your dog would care?" Kara asked. Maeve looked at Briggs, then at the old bell tower. There was a cellar beneath it once. Jonah straightened. Archer looked at him. "A cellar?" Maeve's hand tightened on her scarf. St. Alder was not always an orphanage. After the 1958 fire, it served as a shelter for logging families who lost homes. They stored food under the chapel. Some old drainage line ran toward Hollow Run. But that was before my time. The county said it collapsed. Years ago. "Did they inspect it?" Jonah asked. Maeve gave a tired, humorless smile. "The county said many things." Briggs pawed the door again, harder. The children had gone quiet now. Even the smallest ones seemed to understand that the dog had found a word none of the adults had spoken. Tessa hugged the clipboard to her chest. "Miss Maeve, is it safe?" "No," Kara said immediately. Maeve looked at Kara. Neither is standing here waiting for the forest to decide. For a brief second, the clearing seemed to hold two kinds of authority. Kara's, born of training, radios, and loss. Maeve's, born of years spent keeping children alive through nightmares no map could name. Archer moved to the chapel door. Key? Maeve dug into the pocket of her coat with trembling fingers and produced a ring heavy with old keys. The brass one, unless the lock has rusted itself into sainthood. It's about to meet a less patient religion, Archer said, taking the key. The smallest child near Tessa whispered, "Is the dog a firefighter?" Tessa looked at Briggs, who was now glaring at the door with grave professional disappointment. "Today," she said, "I think the dog outranks all of us." Even Kara almost smiled. The brass key stuck twice before turning. Archer pushed the chapel door open, and a breath of stale, cooler air slid out past his boots. Not enough to celebrate, enough to notice. Inside, the chapel smelled of dust, old hymnals, mouse droppings, and something damp beneath the floor. Light entered through narrow windows, striping the pews in pale gold. The little room had not been used in years, but someone had kept it from becoming ruin. There were stacked chairs along the wall, a cracked wooden cross, and a small raised platform where a preacher might once have stood promising mercy to people who had already lost too much. Briggs entered first. His nails clicked once, twice, then stopped. He went to the front of the chapel and began sniffing around the platform, his tail lowered, his ears tilted, listening. Jonah crouched beside him and rapped his knuckles against the floorboards. The sound changed near the left edge of the platform, solid, then hollow. Kara heard it too. Maeve closed her eyes briefly. "I asked them to check this," she whispered. 3 times. I asked after the winter flood. I asked after the roof sank. I asked after the little ones started playing near the chapel steps. Archer looked at her. The guilt on Maeve's face was not dramatic. It was worse. It was old. It had settled into her like dust into floor cracks. "You were ignored," he said. "I accepted being ignored," she answered. Outside, someone shouted. A firefighter's radio crackled. The children murmured. Kara stepped to the chapel entrance and looked toward the access road. "We may not have time to turn this into a full excavation." Jonah slid a pocket knife under the seam of the boards. "We don't need full. We need to know if air is moving." Briggs suddenly lifted his head. His body turned toward the east side of the property. A second later, a firefighter ran into view beyond the chapel door. "Captain Wynne, east gate is chained." Kara spun. "What?" "New chain, heavy, padlocked. That gate is supposed to stay clear all fire season." Archer followed Kara outside. The east gate stood beyond the apple trees, half hidden by brush and a leaning fence panel. A firefighter in yellow gear tugged uselessly at a bright steel chain wrapped through the bars. The lock looked new, clean, and wrong. Jonah crouched beside it. He touched the chain, then rubbed his fingers together. "Fresh oil." Kara's face hardened. "Who locked this?" No one answered. That silence had weight. From behind them came a smooth male voice. "Captain, if I may?" A tall man in a dark field jacket approached from near the front drive. Dorian Slate was 54, a logging contractor and one of St. Alder's largest donors. He had the polished look of a mountain businessman who preferred photographs of muddy work to mud itself. He was about 6 foot, tall and controlled, with a clean, well-kept face, light skin, dark brown hair touched with silver and combed neatly back. His eyes were cold gray or perhaps very dark brown. Either way, they revealed little. He wore a thin charcoal turtleneck, a premium dark charcoal field jacket, fitted dark trousers, clean dark leather boots, and thin black leather gloves. In a yard full of ash and sweat, he looked almost untouched. That alone made Archer dislike him. Dorian lifted both hands slightly, a gesture meant to calm. There is an old maintenance track west of here. I have used it with equipment. It may be passable. Kara stared at him. Why is it not on our fire access map? It is private timberland, not intended for public use. Jonah looked at Dorian's boots. Archer did too. Red mud clung around the soles, mixed with pine resin and a faint black smear like machine grease. There was no red mud in the orphanage yard. Briggs came out of the chapel. The moment he saw Dorian, his whole body changed. No barking, no lunging. The dog simply placed himself between Dorian and the children, shoulders squared, head low, amber eyes fixed on the man's gloved hands. Dorian's polite expression tightened. Is your dog dangerous, Mr. Morrow? Archer watched Briggs breathe in, slow and deliberate. Only when someone gives him a reason. Kara looked from Briggs to Dorian, then to Jonah. Can your west track move 14 children? Dorian hesitated just a fraction too long. With care, Jonah stood. If the wind is cutting through that slope the way I think it is, west may be worse than north. Dorian's jaw flexed. With respect, Ranger, I know this land. Jonah's voice stayed mild. So do fires. A sound came from inside the chapel, wood shifting. Then Briggs turned away from Dorian so suddenly that every head followed him. He ran back inside. Archer went after him with Kara, Jonah, and Maeve close behind. At the front of the chapel, Briggs was clawing at the hollow section of floor near the platform, scraping through dust and old varnish. Jonah and Archer pried up the first loosened board. It came free with a groan. Beneath it lay darkness, framed by old beams and stone. Then a breath of cold air rose from below, not stale, moving. Maeve covered her mouth. Kara crouched, shining her flashlight into the opening. The beam vanished down a narrow space lined with old stone and damp earth. Jonah leaned closer. There's airflow. Archer felt it against his face. Cool, faint, impossible, and real. Briggs did not wait for permission. The German shepherd slipped through the opening and dropped into the dark below. Briggs! Archer snapped. For 1 second, nothing came back. Then from beneath the chapel floor came a short, sharp bark. Not fear, a signal. Archer lowered himself to one knee beside the opening, staring into the black. The old shelter beneath St. Alder was not dead, and Briggs had found something down there. The space beneath St. Alder was not a miracle. It was a throat of earth, stone, old timber, and forgotten intentions. Archer Morrow lowered himself into the cellar passage first, boots landing in damp soil with a soft, ugly sound. The air below was cooler than the burning yard above, but it was not clean. It carried the smell of wet clay, rot, old wood, and minerals stirred awake after decades of being left alone. Briggs stood several feet ahead in the passage, yellow-black coat dimmed by dust. Amber eyes catching the flashlight beam like small lamps in a tomb. Kara Wynne came down after Archer, jaw set tight beneath the ash smudged across her face. Jonah Brant followed with his field notebook sealed in one vest pocket and a compact flashlight in his teeth while he eased through the opening. Above them, the muffled voices of children drifted through the chapel floorboards, thin and frightened, like birds trapped under a roof too hot for wings. The tunnel ran under the chapel in a narrow line of stone and packed earth. Old roots had pushed through the walls. Some boards overhead sagged low enough that Archer had to crouch. Water beaded on the stones and slid into thin black lines along the floor. Briggs moved first, nose close to the ground, each step careful. He was not excited. He was working. That was the difference Archer trusted more than any map. Jonah crouched and pressed 2 fingers into the mud. Still damp. From what? Kara asked. Groundwater, drainage, maybe a spring seep. Jonah lifted his light toward the far end. Air is moving from that direction. Archer felt it now, a faint pull against his cheek cooler than the smoke-stained wind above. Could lead toward Hollow Run. Could, Jonah said. Could also narrow into a rat hole and bury us. Kara gave him a dry look. Your gift for hope is why people invite you places. No one invites me places. Despite himself, Archer almost smiled. It lasted less than a second. A heavy thump rolled overhead. Dust sifted down in a pale sheet. Briggs froze, ears high, then lowered his body and listened. Somewhere beyond the cellar ceiling, a tree had fallen, or a beam had shifted, or the fire had taken another bite out of the world. Kara looked up, and for the first time, Archer saw fear pass across her face without permission. Not panic. Memory. You good? He asked. She did not answer immediately. 5 years ago, I let 2 rookies follow a volunteer guide through a shortcut during a ridge fire. The guide swore he knew the old trail. The map said it was closed, but the fire was behind them, and I chose speed. Her voice hardened around the last words. The trail ended in a slide. Wind boxed them in. I still know exactly how long their radios transmitted after the smoke took their lungs. The tunnel seemed to shrink around them. Archer said nothing. There were graves a person did not step on with comfort. Kara looked at him. So when you tell me your dog feels something, understand what I hear. Archer's eyes dropped to Briggs. I don't follow him because he feels things. I follow him because he notices things before I do. Briggs moved again, as if accepting the explanation. They pressed deeper. The tunnel was not a clean passage. 20 yards in, the right wall had slumped inward. Earth filled nearly half the space. Beyond it, a low gap remained. Just large enough for a child to crawl if the old beams held. Jonah examined the spill carefully, then scraped at the lower edge with his knife. This isn't a full collapse, he said. It washed in. Recently, maybe after winter runoff. So we can clear it? Kara asked. With time? Kara's expression said time was the one tool not in her truck. Archer studied the gap. Children can pass one at a time if we brace the upper board. Adults? Some, not fast. Briggs suddenly veered left and began sniffing hard near a root that had split through the wall. His lips pulled slightly, not into a snarl, but into that concentrated expression dogs get when the world has given them a scent too important to swallow. Archer moved beside him. There, pressed into the wet clay, was a streak of red mud unlike the darker soil around it. Mixed into it was a black, oily smear. Not old. Not from 1958. Not from groundwater. Jonah touched it, smelled his finger, and his face changed. Machine grease. Kara's eyes narrowed. Down here. Jonah looked toward the direction of the east gate above them, then back at the red smear. Or washed in from disturbed ground nearby. Archer felt Briggs press against his leg, tense but silent. For a moment the tunnel held a strange stillness. Above them was a burning forest. Around them was a forgotten cellar, and beneath their boots lay a fresh trace of human machinery, where only earth and age should have been. The maps had not merely forgotten this road. Someone may have wanted it forgotten. They returned to the chapel with that thought walking behind them like a second shadow. Above ground, St. Alder had changed in the few minutes they were below. The copper sky had darkened. Ash fell thicker now, soft and gray, landing on children's hair and shoulders until Tessa Bloom moved among them with damp towels, brushing it away as if brushing away bad dreams. 3 groups, Tessa said, voice trembling but organized. Her clipboard was finally right side up. Little ones first with Maeve, then middle group, older kids last. Maeve Hollis knelt before a little boy whose towel had slipped. She retied it with hands that shook only after the knot was done. Remember geese together, she told him. Can Briggs be a goose? The boy asked. Maeve looked toward the chapel where Briggs emerged covered in dust. Briggs may be whatever he wishes today. Near the porch, Elsie Calder was helping two younger children wet their sleeves from a plastic jug. Elsie was 12 years old, small and thin, but there was a sharpness to her that made her seem older in the eyes than in the body. Her light skin had gone pale from smoke and fear. Hazel brown eyes watched everything with quick, guarded intelligence. Her chestnut brown hair, tied low and loose, had already escaped in strands around her angular young face. She wore a pale brick-red sweater under an old faded navy jacket, dark jeans, and worn sneakers. A small pale blue ribbon was tied around her wrist, dirty now at the edges. She did not cry. That worried Archer a little. Children who did not cry often had already learned crying did not always bring help fast enough. Beside Tessa, a small boy coughed hard enough to bend forward. Noah Lark was 6, slight and fragile, with a round, pale face, soft, messy brown hair, and dark brown eyes too gentle for a day like this. He wore a muted mustard-yellow pullover beneath a small blue-gray puffer jacket, dark, soft pants, and brown-gray child shoes. One hand clutched Tessa's sleeve while the other pressed against his chest. "Noah," Elsie said quickly. "I'm okay," Noah whispered, which fooled no one. Tessa searched the medical bag hanging from her shoulder, then searched again faster. Maeve saw her face. "Tessa!" "The backup inhaler isn't here." Tessa's voice thinned. "The main kit. When the east awning came down, I grabbed the children, but the kit, Maeve, I think I dropped it by the infirmary door." Elsie went still. Archer saw it. So did Briggs. The girl's gaze shifted toward the east hall of the main building. Smoke pressed against the windows from inside, not thick yet, but gathering. Her hand tightened over the blue ribbon on her wrist. "No," Maeve said quietly before Elsie moved. "Elsie, no." Elsie did not answer. Kara stepped between them and the building. "No one goes back in until I clear it." Noah coughed again, smaller this time, which somehow sounded worse. While Tessa guided him to sit, Dorian Slate approached from the west side of the yard, his polished boots no longer quite clean, but still too clean compared with everyone else. "Captain Wynne," he said, smooth voice strained at the edges. "We are wasting precious minutes. My west road is available. The children can be moved before this cellar fantasy becomes a coffin." Maeve's face tightened. "Do not call the place that may save them a fantasy." Dorian turned his charm toward her. "Maeve, I have supported St. Alder for years. You know my concern is genuine." Briggs gave a low growl. It was not loud, but it cut through the yard. The dog had placed himself near Elsie between her and Dorian. His head was low, eyes fixed on the man's gloved hands. Archer watched carefully. Briggs had ignored crying children, shouting firefighters, falling ash, and the unstable tunnel. But Dorian made him bristle. Dorian noticed. So did Elsie. The girl looked at Briggs, then at Dorian's boots, where red mud had dried in the seams. Jonah stepped near Kara and unfolded the corner of his map. "That west road is not on county fire access files." Dorian's mouth tightened. "Because it is a maintenance road." "For what?" Jonah asked. "Timber management." "Active?" Dorian's smile did not reach his eyes. "Not officially." Kara turned her head slowly. "What does that mean?" "It means," Dorian said, voice cooling, "that this is not the time for bureaucratic debate." "No," Kara said, "and this is exactly the time people die from things men call paperwork." Before Dorian could answer, a firefighter shouted from near the east fence. Jonah moved that way, and Archer followed. The chain on the east gate was new steel, bright beneath the ash. Jonah examined the padlock, then ran his thumb over the oily surface. "Same grease," he murmured. Archer looked back toward Dorian. Dorian was watching Elsie. Not the fire, not the gate, the girl. It was a brief glance, too quick for most people. But Archer had spent half his life reading what men tried not to show before they reached for weapons, lies, or exits. Elsie saw it too, and something in her face closed. Kara ordered 2 firefighters to begin cutting the chain, but the first attempt threw sparks and barely marked the hardened steel. Time buckled around them. The north trail grew less certain with every gust. The old tunnel was dangerous, but it was no longer the worst option. Then Noah coughed again. This time, he could not catch his breath after. Tessa dropped beside him, one hand on his back. "Slow, honey. In through the nose, if you can." Noah shook his head, eyes watering. Elsie stood frozen for 1 second. Archer knew that look. It was not childish rebellion. It was a door opening inside a wound. Maeve had once told the town in a winter fundraiser speech Archer had half heard from the back wall that Elsie had lost her younger brother in a house fire before coming to St. Alder. Smoke, confusion, a missing inhaler, adults promising help that arrived too late. Now the old grief had found a new body. "Elsie," Archer said. The girl looked at him. There was fear in her eyes, but beneath it was decision. "I know where the kit fell," she said. "No," Archer said, but someone shouted near the chapel. A beam in the cellar access had shifted. Kara turned. Jonah called for Archer's help to brace it before they could move the first group. It took only 3 seconds. That was all Elsie needed. She pulled a wet towel over her mouth and slipped through the side entrance of the main building. Briggs saw her go. The German shepherd jerked against Archer's grip. "Briggs, heel!" For the first time that day, Briggs disobeyed completely. He twisted free, claws skidding over the ashy boards, and launched after Elsie. Archer turned just in time to see the yellow-black shape vanish through the smoke-dark doorway. Above the east wing, a thin line of flame crawled along the roof shingles. Then it caught the edge of the infirmary eaves and brightened. Archer ran. Archer reached the side entrance with his shoulder lowered and one arm over his mouth. Smoke had begun to gather inside the east wing, not yet a solid wall, but thick enough to make the hallway look longer than it was. Heat crawled along the ceiling. Somewhere above, wood popped and snapped in small, angry bursts. The sound of an old building trying to keep its bones together. "Elsie!" Archer shouted. His voice struck the corridor and came back rough. Briggs answered first. One sharp bark from deeper inside. Archer moved toward it, staying low, one hand sliding along the wall. The hallway smelled of old paint, hot dust, and smoke that was still young but growing teeth. A framed drawing had fallen from the wall. A child's crayon picture of St. Alder home under a smiling yellow sun. Archer stepped over it, and for a terrible second, the cheerful sun stared up through the smoke like something that had been lied to. Behind him, the yard had become a living alarm. Children cried near the chapel steps. Firefighters shouted over radios. Tessa Bloom's voice rose above the confusion, counting names again and again as if every name were a rope she could keep from burning. "Liam, Grace, Noah, Ben, Harper, stay with me, stay with me." Maeve Hollis stood among the children with ash collecting on her pale cream scarf. She looked smaller beneath the copper-dark sky, but her voice held. She told the children the story of little birds crossing a storm by flying close together. The lead bird was frightened too, Maeve said, kneeling before a child whose face was streaked with tears. But the poor thing was so busy pretending to be brave that it forgot to fall out of the sky. A few children gave broken little laughs. It was not much. Sometimes not much was a lantern. Kara Wynne moved through the yard with command in every line of her body. Her brick-red wildfire jacket was darkening with ash. her gray-brown eyes sharp despite the smoke. She had stopped arguing with the facts. The main road was blocked. The east gate was chained. The north trail was becoming a trap. The forgotten passage beneath the chapel had turned from an old rumor into the only ugly hope left. "Jonah!" Kara shouted. "Brace the cellar entry. First group goes now." Jonah Brant was already on his knees near the chapel opening, wedging a broken plank beneath a sagging beam. His lean face was unreadable except for the eyes which measured danger with grim patience. "Board will hold if they crawl one at a time," he said. "No running, no bunching." "No running, no bunching," Kara repeated to the nearest firefighter. "You hear him? One at a time." Inside the east wing, Archer followed Briggs' second bark. He found the infirmary door partly blocked by a fallen shelf. Smoke curled from the upper corner of the room where heat had begun to blister the paint. Briggs was halfway under a table, teeth hooked gently in the sleeve of Elsie Calder's faded navy jacket. Elsie was on her stomach, coughing hard. Her light brown hair had come loose from its low tie, strands sticking to her damp face. Her hazel brown eyes were wide but focused, too old for 12 years and too frightened to keep pretending otherwise. One hand clutched a red medical pouch against her chest. "I got it," she rasped. Archer shoved the fallen shelf aside just enough to reach her. "That was not the instruction." "I know. This is not a debate club." "I know that too." Even in the smoke, even while coughing, the girl sounded offended by being rescued too slowly. Briggs backed out from under the table, then turned his head sharply upward. Archer felt it before he understood it. A shift in heat, a faint shower of dust from above. "Move!" He grabbed Elsie under the arms and dragged her back. Briggs lunged forward, not away, slamming his body into Elsie's side and forcing her lower as a strip of ceiling broke loose. Burning plaster and charred lath crashed where her shoulders had been. Elsie screamed once, more from shock than injury. Archer pulled her against him, shielding her face with his sleeve. Briggs shook sparks from his coat and barked toward the door. "Go, go," Archer said. They crawled out of the infirmary and into the corridor. The smoke had thickened. At the far end, daylight glowed gray through the side entrance. Archer could see it. Not far. 10 yards, maybe 12. In fire, 12 yards could become a country. Briggs took the lead, guiding low, his yellow-black coat rippling with tense muscle. Elsie crawled behind him, clutching the pouch. Archer stayed at her back. Then the building groaned. It was a deep sound, not loud but final, like an old giant waking under pain. Briggs stopped. Archer saw his ears tilt toward the right wall. "No," Archer whispered, already understanding too late. The overhead support beam gave way with a roar. Heat burst through the corridor as a burning length of timber came down between Archer and Briggs, striking the floor hard enough to throw sparks across the wall. The impact split the hallway. Fire crawled along the beam's edge, orange and hungry. Briggs was on the other side. Elsie was with Archer. For half a second, all sound vanished. Briggs stood beyond the fallen beam, low and braced, smoke curling around his muzzle. He did not howl. He did not throw himself against the fire. His amber eyes found Archer's face, then shifted past him. Toward the chapel, toward the children, toward the passage waiting beneath the floor. Archer's chest locked. "Briggs," he said. The dog's tail was low, his breathing was rough, but he held his ground like a sentry at a gate no one else could see. Behind Archer, Elsie coughed and pushed the medical pouch toward him. "Noah." The name cut through him. Outside, Kara's voice thundered through the yard. "Morrow, we need you at the cellar now." Archer did not move. He looked at the burning beam. There might be a way around. Through the infirmary, then the storage room, maybe out through the back wall. Maybe, if the fire had not already reached the eaves. if the floor held, if he had minutes. He did not have minutes. Jonah appeared at the side entrance, face smeared with ash. "Archer, smoke is pulling down into the passage. If we don't move the first group now, the small ones won't get through." Archer stared at Briggs. Something old and merciless opened inside him. Another corridor, another fire. Evan Rusk, pinned beneath wreckage, blood on his mouth, still trying to grin because men like Evan believed humor could bully death for a few more seconds. "Move, Morrow. That is an order." Archer had spent years hating that order. Years thinking obedience had been another name for abandonment. Now Briggs gave him the same command without words. The dog looked once toward Elsie, then toward the chapel, then back at Archer. The meaning was so clear it felt holy and cruel. Elsie gripped Archer's sleeve with a trembling hand. Her voice was broken by smoke and guilt. "He found me so you could get us out." Archer wanted to tell her she was wrong. He wanted to tell the universe it had chosen the wrong man for this lesson once and had no right to ask it again. The beam spat sparks. Briggs flinched but did not retreat. Kara shouted again, closer this time. "Archer!" The corridor was becoming a furnace throat. Heat pressed against Archer's face. Elsie's coughs were growing weaker, which frightened him more than the loud ones had. Archer's hand rose, palm open toward Briggs. "Stay alive," he said. Briggs gave one short bark, a soldier accepting orders. Archer lifted Elsie into his arms and ran low toward the door. The outside air hit like a slap. Smoke, ash, shouting, crying children, the brutal copper sky. All of it came back at once. Archer carried Elsie to Tessa, who seized the medical pouch and dropped to her knees beside Noah. Noah's face had gone pale, his dark eyes wet and frightened. Tessa fumbled the inhaler once, cursed softly under her breath in a way that would have scandalized Maeve on a normal day, then helped the boy breathe. "One," she whispered. "Good. Again. There you are. Stay with me, sweetheart." Maeve looked at Elsie, then at Archer's empty side. Her face changed. "Where is Briggs?" Archer could not answer. For 1 second, the children seemed to notice too. The dog who had moved through them like courage with paws was not there. Then Kara grabbed Archer by the shoulder. "Cellar! Now!" He turned toward the east wing. A line of flame crawled along the window frame. Kara's grip tightened. "If you go back this second, I lose you and the children." Archer's eyes hardened. "Let go." "No." The word landed between them like a stone. Kara's face was fierce, but not cold. She knew exactly what she was asking. That was the worst part. She was not a commander ignoring love. She was a woman who had learned that love did not make smoke breathable. "The passage is narrowing," Jonah called from the chapel. "Beam is slipping. I need hands." At the chapel entrance, the first group of children waited. Little faces covered by damp towels, small hands gripping sleeves. Tessa was lifting Noah carefully after the inhaler, trying to keep his breathing steady. Maeve stood at the center of them, eyes shining, lips moving around silent prayers, and counted names. Archer saw all 14 lives arranged before him. Then he saw Briggs behind the fallen beam, amber eyes steady in smoke. The choice was not between dog and duty. That would have been easier. It was between the one soul that had kept Archer alive and the many souls Briggs had led him here to save. Archer felt something tear inside him, not cleanly, not nobly, like cloth caught on barbed wire. He turned away from the east wing. Each step toward the chapel felt like betrayal wearing boots. Kara released his shoulder and moved with him, not victorious, not relieved, only grim. Jonah made space as Archer dropped beside the cellar opening and shoved his shoulder beneath the sagging board. Pain flashed down his back. He welcomed it. Pain was simple. Pain did not ask for forgiveness. "First group," Kara ordered. Maeve, take them. Maeve guided the smallest children down one at a time, her voice low and steady. Geese together, one wing, then the next. That's it, my darling. Hands on the stone. Follow the light. Tessa carried Noah to the opening, his breathing shaky but present. Elsie stood beside her, red-eyed, soot on her cheek, the pale blue ribbon at her wrist nearly blackened. She looked toward the east wing and whispered something Archer could not hear. Maybe an apology, maybe a prayer. From inside the burning corridor came 3 short barks. Clear, measured, not panic, signal. Archer closed his eyes for half a heartbeat. Then he opened them and held the beam while the children began to descend. Behind him, Briggs barked once more through the smoke, and Archer understood with a grief so sharp it felt like faith. The dog had chosen the flame so the children could choose the dark passage and live. The cellar swallowed the children one by one, not with cruelty but with the ancient patience of earth. Archer Morrow crouched beside the opening beneath the chapel floor, one shoulder wedged under a sagging board, both hands locked around a splintered support beam. The old wood pressed into the muscle above his collarbone. Every breath tasted of smoke, damp stone, and the bitter dust of a building that had waited too long to be needed. Above him the chapel trembled. Below him 14 children had to pass through a throat of darkness. There was no space left inside Archer for panic. Panic was a luxury for men who did not yet know the shape of the choice before them. Archer knew it now. It had teeth. It had firelight. It had amber eyes behind a fallen beam. "First group is moving," Kara Wynne called. Her voice was rough but controlled. She was at the edge of the cellar opening, one knee on the floor, brick-red rescue jacket darkened by ash. The radio at her shoulder spat broken fragments of other emergencies. Her gray-brown eyes kept moving. Children, beam, smoke, Archer's face. Then back to the children. Maeve Hollis descended first with the smallest ones. The 63-year-old woman looked too slight to lead anyone through darkness, but the children obeyed her as if her voice were a handrail. Her pale cream scarf was gray now, and loose strands of silver-white hair had escaped her low bun. Still, she kept speaking softly. One hand on the wall, one hand on the friend in front, geese together. No brave little ducklings going solo. A child sniffled. "I thought we were geese. Today we are whatever survives," Maeve said. Even Archer felt the corner of his mouth twitch, though grief sat like iron beneath his ribs. Tessa Bloom helped Noah Lark down next. The young caregiver's light olive-quilted jacket was streaked with soot, and her hastily tied ponytail had half fallen apart. She held the small boy carefully, one arm around his shoulders, the other keeping the inhaler pouch close. Noah's face remained pale, his dark eyes wet and enormous above the damp towel, but his breathing had steadied enough to move. "Slow steps," Tessa whispered. "Noah, you are doing beautifully." "I'm scared," Noah said. "That makes 2 of us," Tessa replied. "But I am older, so mine counts as professional fear." He gave a tiny breath that might have been a laugh. Elsie Calder stood behind them with smoke stains on her cheeks and the pale blue ribbon on her wrist nearly black. At 12, she had the posture of a child trying to become a wall. Her hazel-brown eyes kept flicking toward Archer, then toward the east wing beyond the chapel door, then back to Noah. She knew what had been left behind. So did Archer. He shifted his shoulder higher beneath the board. Pain ran down his spine. "Good," he thought. "Let it hurt somewhere simple." "Move," Kara ordered, "but keep them moving." Jonah Brandt waited below in the tunnel with a flashlight clenched between his teeth. Lean body crouched in the mud, one hand bracing a lower support. The forest ranger's calm had turned almost surgical. He did not waste words. He pointed where children should place their hands. tapped the safe stones, and watched the ceiling as if he could argue with gravity by staring hard enough. The first child vanished into the passage, then the next. Then the next. The chapel floor groaned. Archer held. Outside, the fire had become a living army. It marched over shingles, licked through dry brush, and sent heat into the chapel in slow, invisible waves. The air above the cellar opening began to move strangely, tugging downward through cracks in the floorboards. "Smoke draw," Jonah warned from below. "It's starting." Kara cursed under her breath. "Faster." "Not too fast," Jonah snapped. "If they bunch at the wash-in, they'll jam the gap." Archer pictured the tunnel. Old roots, wet clay, half-collapsed earth, children crawling through a passage no adult would have chosen except under threat of flame. He pictured Briggs moving ahead, nose low, finding the air, finding the old road no map remembered. Then his mind betrayed him. He saw the corridor again. Not this one, the other one, years earlier. Heat, plaster. Evan Rusk pinned beneath a section of ceiling, blood dark at the corner of his mouth, one eye narrowed against smoke. Evan had been the kind of man who looked at disaster and insulted it. Even trapped, he had tried to smile. "Move, Morrow." Archer's hands tightened until splinters bit his palms. Back then he had obeyed. Back then he had survived. That had been the wound. A little girl slipped on the lower step. Archer caught the back of her coat before she fell. "Eyes forward," he said, voice low. "You're all right." She stared at him, trembling. "Is the dog coming?" The question split through him so cleanly that for a moment he could not answer. Kara's eyes moved to him. Maeve, already lower in the passage, heard it too. Her face changed, but her voice did not. "Briggs has his own work, sweetheart," Maeve called gently. "And so do we." The girl nodded as if that made sense in the terrible way children accept what adults offer when there is no time to ask again. Archer released her coat. She crawled down. That was the moment something shifted inside him. Not healing, not peace. Something harsher. A small, burning understanding. Briggs had not followed Archer into the fire for Archer's sake alone. The dog had followed the scent of the helpless, the lost, the frightened. He had found Elsie. He had helped bring the medicine back. He had stood between danger and children because that was what his whole body had been trained by love and instinct to do. If Archer ran back now, before the children were through, he would not be honoring Briggs. He would be undoing him. That thought hurt worse than the beam. "Second group," Kara said. The middle children moved. A boy with freckles froze at the opening, eyes fixed on the dark below. Tessa leaned near him. "Remember what I said about messy rooms?" The boy blinked. "That if we survive, you'll never complain again." "I said I would try never to complain again." "You said never." "I was under emotional pressure." Another child behind him whispered, "That means she lied." "I heard that," Tessa said. For one fragile second, laughter flickered in the chapel, small, cracked, human. It passed quickly, but it left warmth behind, not from fire, but from life insisting on itself in the dark. Then the building shuddered again. This time a thin seam opened in the wall above the chapel windows. Smoke spilled through it like gray cloth. Kara looked toward the east wing, then at Archer. Her expression said what she would not. Time was shrinking. Elsie stepped to the cellar opening with Noah beside her. Noah clutched the medical pouch as if it were a holy relic. "Will the tunnel be mad because we woke it up?" Elsie crouched beside him, coughing once into her sleeve. "No. Old things like being useful again." Noah considered that. "Like Miss Maeve?" Maeve from below called up, "I heard that, young man." Noah's eyes widened in horror. Even Archer almost laughed. Elsie took Noah's hand. Briggs is holding the dragon back, she whispered. Noah looked at her. Can he beat it? Elsie's face folded for a fraction of a second. Then she did something braver than running into a burning room. She chose the truth that could still protect a child. He doesn't have to beat it, she said. He only has to hold the door long enough. Archer looked away. The chapel blurred. He did not have time for tears. Tears belonged to later, if later still existed. Go, he said. Elsie helped Noah descend. The beam above Archer slipped. A crack snapped through the wood. Jonah shouted from below, "Brace!" Archer threw his full weight upward. The board bit into his shoulder. Something in his back pulled hot and sharp. Kara grabbed the side support and shoved a loose plank into place. "Hold it," she barked. "I am holding it." "Hold it better." "This is my better." "Your better needs work." It was absurd. It was nearly funny. It might have saved them from screaming. The last group moved. Older children first, then Tessa, then Maeve guiding two small ones who had become too frightened to crawl without her hands on their shoulders. The tunnel swallowed them all. Only Archer and Kara remained at the top. "Go," Kara said. "You first. Do not start that noble nonsense with me." "Captain," I said, "go." Another groan rolled through the chapel. This time it came from the east wall. Archer knew the sound of structural surrender. He dropped into the opening. Mud met. His boots below. Jonah caught his arm and pulled him into the tunnel just as Kara slid down after him. Above them, part of the chapel ceiling gave way with a crash that sent smoke pouring through the opening like a beast lowering its head. "Move!" Kara shouted. They moved. The tunnel was worse with children inside it. Fear filled the narrow space, turning every breath into something shared. Small shoulders bumped stone, knees scraped mud. Someone cried for Maeve. Someone else asked if the fire could crawl underground. Tessa answered that fire was far too proud to crawl and preferred showing off upstairs. The children moved because there was no other direction. At the wash-in, the passage narrowed to a gap between wet earth and a leaning beam. Jonah went through first, then turned and pulled children one by one. Archer stayed at the bad side, lifting the beam with both hands while Kara guided bodies under it. Mud fell in clumps. Smoke thinned into the tunnel from behind. A little boy panicked halfway through and kicked backwards, striking Archer in the jaw. "Sorry," the boy cried. "Do it again and I'll charge you for dental work," Archer grunted. The boy crawled faster. Elsie waited until Noah passed, then tried to go after him, but her strength failed. She sagged against the tunnel wall, coughing hard. Archer lowered one hand from the beam. Kara saw. "I've got it." "You don't." "I said I've got it." She shoved her shoulder under the wood where his had been and grimaced. Archer pulled Elsie through the gap. She was light, too light, all bones and stubbornness. "I left him," she whispered. Archer's throat closed. He knew who she meant. "No," he said. "He chose you." She shook her head, tears cutting clean lines through soot. "That doesn't make it better." "No," Archer said. "It makes it worth carrying." She looked at him then, really looked, and something passed between them that had no age. Two survivors recognizing the terrible arithmetic of being spared. They kept moving. At last the tunnel widened. The air changed. Cooler, wetter, alive. A gray light appeared ahead. One child saw it and began sobbing with relief. Another tried to run, but Maeve caught his collar with surprising speed. "Geese," she said firmly, "not panicked squirrels." The opening emerged near Hollow Run, where stone shelves cut through the earth and a thin creek moved below them. Smoke hung in the sky, but the ground here was damp and mostly bare. Jonah's auxiliary crew waited at the rocks with blankets, water, and wide eyes. One by one, the children climbed out. 14. Maeve counted them twice, then a third time, lips moving around each name. When she reached the last, her knees gave out. Tessa caught her too late to keep her from sinking to the ground, but gently enough that Maeve did not strike the stone. "Miss Maeve!" "I am not dead," Maeve wheezed. "I am simply sitting with dramatic timing." Then she coughed, and Tessa began crying while trying to laugh. Noah sat wrapped in a blanket, breathing shallow but steady. Elsie remained beside him, one hand on his shoulder, her eyes fixed on the ridge above. Archer turned. St. Alder burned against the slope. The old roof glowed through smoke. The chapel bell tower was a black shape against orange light. The apple trees shuddered in the wind, leaves flashing like small, frightened hands. He listened. Nothing came from the fire but fire. Kara stepped beside him, her face gray with ash and grief she would not name. "Morrow." He did not look at her. She placed a hand on his shoulder, not restraining him this time, just anchoring him. "No one goes back into that structure now," she said softly. Archer's face went calm, too calm, the kind of calm that came when a man locked a door inside himself because if he did not, everything behind it would flood out and drown him. He looked at the burning shape of St. Alder. He saw Briggs in every orange pulse. Then behind the chapel, something rose differently from the rest of the smoke. A pale white column. Thin, low, not black, not gray. Steam. Archer's eyes sharpened. He remembered a detail from the old site map Jonah had unfolded. A stone rainwater cistern behind the chapel. Old, half-buried, fed by runoff gutters before the roof system failed. Briggs had paused near that side earlier. Briggs had noticed something there before anyone else did. Archer took one step toward the ridge. Kara's hand tightened on his shoulder. This time, he did look at her. "There's water behind the chapel," he said. Kara followed his gaze. The pale steam lifted again through the smoke, like a ghost refusing to leave. Archer's dead calm cracked just enough for hope to cut him. Briggs may have found the low ground. Archer did not run back toward St. Alder like a man chasing a ghost. He moved like a soldier returning to a live battlefield. That was the only reason Kara Wynne did not tackle him to the ground. The ridge above Hollow Run glowed through the smoke, orange behind black ribs of trees. The orphanage was no longer a home from that distance. It was a wounded shape burning against the slope, its old roof broken, its chapel half swallowed in heat, its porch collapsing in red pulses. Behind Archer, the children were wrapped in blankets on the stone shelf near the creek. Maeve Hollis sat with her back against a boulder, coughing into a towel while still trying to count heads she had already counted 3 times. Tessa Bloom held Noah Lark close, one hand on his back, the other keeping the inhaler pouch pressed safely against his chest. Elsie Calder stood near them, soot-streaked and silent, staring toward the place where Briggs had disappeared. Archer saw none of it clearly. His mind had narrowed to angles, wind direction, heat shimmer, stone walls, low ground, moisture. The old part of him, the seal who had survived by turning terror into geometry, rose from the wreckage inside him. Not calm, not whole, useful. Kara caught up beside him, breathing hard. Her brick-red wildfire jacket was blackened at the sleeves, and ash clung to the loose strands of dark hair at the nape of her neck. "You go in blind, I drag you back by the collar," she said. Archer kept moving along the lower rock line. "I'm not going in blind. You're going in hurt. That's close." He stopped then, just long enough to look at her. Kara's gray-brown eyes were fierce but not cruel. She had ordered him away from Briggs when the children needed him. She had been right. That did not make the wound smaller. "I'm not going back because I can't let go," Archer said. "I'm going back because he did his job. Now I do mine." Kara held his gaze. For once she did not argue. Instead, she lifted her radio. "Jonah, lower route. We need eyes on the rear chapel wall." Jonah Brant answered through static. "I'm already moving." The ranger appeared below the slope a moment later, lean and dust-coated, his olive field vest streaked with soot. He carried a folded fire map in one hand and kept low as he crossed the exposed stone. His face looked carved from old wood, every line practical, every fear folded away for later. "There's a drainage cut behind the chapel," Jonah said. "Narrow. Fire's moving overhead, but the stone lip may shield part of the rear wall." "May," Kara repeated. Jonah's mouth twitched. "I charge extra for certainty." Archer almost heard Briggs's dry huff in his head, the one the dog made when humans wasted breath. They followed the drainage cut upward. The heat grew teeth as they climbed. Smoke pressed low in places, then lifted in sudden gusts. The ground was treacherous with ash over wet stone, each step a bargain between speed and survival. Kara stayed slightly behind Archer, not because she trusted him completely, but because she had decided trust was faster than stopping him. They had nearly reached the rear slope when Jonah stopped. Voices came from the side of the main building, not firefighters. One voice was sharp with panic and trying very hard to remain expensive. "Dorian Slate." Archer dropped behind a half-burned shrub and looked through the smoke. Dorian was near the orphanage office window, pulling a metal lockbox through the broken frame. His dark charcoal field jacket was smeared now, one sleeve torn, but he still moved with the outrage of a man offended that disaster had touched him personally. His black gloves fumbled at the box handle. Beside him lay a leather folder, open just enough for papers to spill across the ash. Jonah's eyes narrowed. Kara's face hardened into command. Dorian saw them too late. He straightened, clutching the lockbox. "Captain Wynne, thank God, I was trying to recover donor records, insurance documents. Things St. Alder will need." Kara said nothing. That silence did more damage than shouting. Jonah moved to the scattered papers and picked up one with 2 fingers. His eyes moved over it once, then again. "This is not donor paperwork," he said. Dorian's polite mask cracked. "You have no authority to—" Jonah held the page out to Kara. Archer saw the crude lines of a private timber, road drawn behind St. Alder. Dates, equipment notes, a marked gate, a handwritten line in the margin, "Keep east access secured until inspection window passes." Kara read it. The fire roared behind the building as if the forest itself had heard. For a moment, even Archer forgot to breathe. Dorian's voice went thin. "You do not understand context." Kara looked up slowly. "I understand a locked gate. I funded that orphanage for 8 years. You endangered it." "I did not set the fire." "No," Jonah said quietly. "You just gave it a road." Dorian's eyes flashed. "That west cut was managed, controlled. It was supposed to be cleared before dry season." "Supposed to be," Kara repeated. Archer stepped toward him. Dorian backed up, still gripping the lockbox. "Mr. Morrow, I know how this looks." "No," Archer said. "You know exactly how it looks. That's why you came for the box." Dorian tried to move past him. Archer caught him by the front of his expensive jacket and drove him down into the ash-covered ground, not with rage, with precision. Dorian hit hard enough to lose the lockbox, not hard enough to break. For one brief, ugly second, Archer wanted to do more. He thought of Noah's small chest fighting for air, Elsie's soot-lined tears, Maeve counting children like prayers, Briggs behind fire. His fist curled. Then Kara said his name, not as an order, as a warning from one wounded person to another. Archer exhaled through his teeth and held Dorian pinned. "Fire doesn't know how to lie," Archer said. "People do." Kara cuffed Dorian with a zip tie from her rescue kit and shoved him toward Jonah. Get him down to the creek. Keep the documents dry. Dorian struggled. You need me. I know the West Road. Jonah picked up the folder. You've helped enough. Archer was already turning toward the chapel. Kara grabbed his arm once briefly. Listen to me, she said. You get one attempt. We find an opening, we pull him if we can, and we leave before the roof drops. You do not trade your life for guilt. Archer looked toward the smoke-black rear wall. I'm not trading, he said. I'm keeping a promise. They moved along the stone lip. The rear of the chapel had partially collapsed, but the old foundation was thicker than the newer walls. Stone rose waist-high beneath charred timber. A cracked rain gutter hung like a dead vine. Water dripped somewhere inside, steady and faint. Archer lowered himself to crawl beneath a leaning beam. Heat pressed against his back. Smoke rolled above him, caught by the stone and pulled sideways by a narrow draft. He covered his mouth with his sleeve and called the name that had carried him through a year of nightmares. Briggs! No answer. He crawled deeper. The floor here was no longer floor. It was a broken slope of charred boards, wet ash, fallen plaster, and stone. Kara held a light behind him. The beam cut through smoke, caught on the shapes of ruined pews and collapsed lath. Briggs! Still nothing. Archer's heart began to beat in a slow, brutal rhythm. Not again. Not like Evan. Not another order obeyed and another friend left in fire. Then he heard it. A scrape, so faint it might have been water. He froze. Kara heard it too. Her light shifted. There it was again. Scratch. Pause. Scratch. Archer followed the sound toward the rear foundation where a stone cistern had been built into the old wall. Part of the floor had dropped beside it, leaving a narrow pocket beneath a slab of burned timber. The space was low, wet, and half hidden behind fallen boards. He shoved debris aside with both hands. Something moved in the dark. A yellow-black muzzle appeared first, gray with ash. Then amber eyes. Alive. Archer made a sound that was not a word. Briggs lay wedged in the hollow beside the cistern, his body curled awkwardly where the stone had shielded him from direct flame. Water dripped from a cracked pipe onto the ground near his paws. Damp air leaked up from some old drainage seam, thin but real. His coat was smoke-darkened. One shoulder was singed. His front paws looked burned raw at the edges. His breathing came in rough, shallow pulls, but his eyes found Archer, and his tail moved once. Just once. That almost broke Archer more than death would have, because life was asking him to be careful. Easy, Archer whispered. I've got you. Briggs' jaws were clenched around something, a small cloth bag scorched at one corner. Archer frowned, then recognized Elsie's little keepsake satchel from the chapel bench. She must have dropped it when she ran for the medical kit. Briggs had kept it in his mouth through smoke, collapse, heat, and fear. Inside, if Archer remembered correctly, was the battered notebook Maeve used to keep names of children who had passed through St. Alder over the years. Elsie's proof that forgotten children had once been remembered somewhere. Briggs did not know history. He knew Elsie's scent. He knew something had mattered enough to make a child grieve. That had been enough. Kara's voice softened behind him. Can you reach him? Yes. The pocket was too narrow to pull Briggs straight out. Archer had to widen the opening by lifting a half-burned plank while Kara wedged a stone beneath it. Every second sounded like the building deciding whether to forgive them. Briggs coughed. Archer's hands shook for the first time. No, he whispered. Stay with me. He slid one arm under Briggs's chest and the other behind his hind legs. The dog gave a low, pained sound, but did not resist. Archer drew him out inch by inch, careful of the paws, careful of the burned shoulder, careful as if lifting a child from a cradle made of knives. When Briggs was free, Archer pulled him against his chest. The German shepherd could not stand. His head dropped beneath Archer's chin, and Archer Morrow, former Navy SEAL, man of square jaw and locked doors, began to cry. Not quietly, not beautifully. The sob tore out of him raw and humiliating, and he did not stop it. He buried his face against Briggs' ash-stiff fur and held him while the chapel burned around them. "I came back," he said. "I came back." Briggs breathed against him. That was answer enough. Kara touched Archer's shoulder. "We have to move." This time Archer obeyed without hatred. He carried Briggs down the drainage cut while Kara guided his steps and Jonah covered them from below, Dorian bound and furious near the creek under guard. Children turned as Archer emerged from smoke with Briggs in his arms. Elsie made one small broken cry and ran forward, then stopped herself when she saw the burns. "He has your bag," Archer said. Elsie covered her mouth. Briggs' tail moved once again. At the creek bed, Dr. Avery Lorne arrived with the secondary rescue team. Avery was 36, a local veterinarian with a compact, capable build, and the calm face of someone who had learned panic did not help bleeding animals. Her light brown hair was tied low and neat despite the ash in the air. She had pale gray-brown eyes, steady hands, and wore a light gray thermal top beneath a dark olive field veterinary jacket, dark jeans, brown waterproof boots, and a moss-green medical bag slung across her body. She knelt beside Briggs without ceremony. Blanket, clean water, nobody crowd him. The children obeyed instantly. Avery examined Briggs' paws, gums, breathing, and burned shoulder with swift tenderness. Smoke inhalation, paw burns, singed coat, possible dehydration. He needs transport, antibiotics, oxygen if we can get it. Archer's voice came out hoarse. "Will he live?" Avery looked at Briggs, then at Archer. "He can," she said. "But this is not finished just because you found him." Archer swallowed. Avery wrapped Briggs' injured paws with careful hands and glanced toward the children, then back at the man kneeling beside the dog as if beside an altar. "You saved those children by leaving him," she said quietly. "Now save him by staying." Archer looked down at Briggs. For the first time all day, he did not look toward the fire. He looked at what had survived it. 3 months after the fire, St. Alder home no longer looked like a wound. It looked like a promise being built slowly by tired hands. The old orphanage had not returned. The fire had taken the steep roof, the porch, the chapel walls, the little infirmary, and most of the apple trees. For weeks afterward, the hillside had smelled of wet ash and burned pine. Even the rain seemed to fall more carefully there, as if afraid to disturb the names that still lived in the ground. But now spring had reached Kestrel Hollow. New timber frames stood where the old building had been. Fresh gravel marked the emergency lane. A wide steel gate opened toward the eastern rock shelf, with a sign that read, "Fire access. Never block." Behind the new foundation, the old cellar passage had been reinforced with concrete ribs, steel rails, emergency lights, and a drainage grate that led toward Hollow Run. No one called it a cellar anymore. The children called it the secret tunnel. Kara Wynne called it Secondary Evacuation Route A. Maeve Hollis called it proof that even an old mistake could be taught to carry people safely. Archer Morrow stood near the half-built entrance with a clipboard in one hand, and a look on his face that suggested he would rather fight a bear than attend a dedication ceremony. He still wore the same old olive-gray tactical combat shirt, frayed at the cuffs and shoulders, the same earth-brown and moss-green combat pants, the same scarred work boots, and the same scratched military watch. His dark brown hair had been trimmed again, neat but not regulation. His clean-shaven face looked leaner than it had before the fire, the square jaw sharper, the gray-blue eyes quieter. Not healed, not untouched, just present. Beside him, Briggs lay in the shade of a temporary wooden wall. The German shepherd's yellow-black coat had grown back unevenly over one shoulder, leaving a darker patch where the new fur had come in rough. His old brown leather collar had been cleaned but not replaced. Archer had refused the donated fancy harness with reflective strips, mostly because Briggs had looked at it as if someone had offered him a clown suit. His front right paw still bothered him on cold mornings. He walked with the slightest limp when the weather turned damp, but his ears remained high, his amber brown eyes bright, and his dignity completely undamaged. Noah Lark had declared him Captain Dog during recovery. Unfortunately for Briggs, Tessa Bloom had taken the title seriously. She had made a paper badge out of yellow construction paper and tape, then attached it to Briggs' collar. The badge was crooked. The letters were uneven. It looked less like an award and more like a warning label made by a nervous raccoon. Briggs tolerated it with the patience of a saint and the expression of a retired general whose army had disappointed him. Archer saw it and, for the first time in months, laughed without flinching afterward. "That is terrible," he told Tessa. Tessa, still petite and quick, with warm brown eyes and light brown hair tied in a rushed low ponytail, placed both hands on her hips. She wore her cream sweater, light olive-quilted jacket, dark pants, and low brown boots. The same practical clothing that made her look like she had been called from a kitchen, a schoolyard, and a minor emergency all at once. "It is handmade," she said. "Handmade things have character." "That badge has a medical condition." Noah, small and pale but breathing easier now, stood beside Briggs in his mustard-yellow sweater and blue-gray puffer jacket. He stroked the dog's ear very carefully. "Captain Dog likes it." Briggs looked at Archer with deep suffering. Archer nodded. "He's being brave," Maeve Hollis watched from near the new porch frame. At 63, she still looked small enough for a strong wind to argue with her, but no wind in Kestrel Hollow had ever won. Her silver-white hair was pinned low, her blue-gray sweater tucked beneath the old taupe-brown coat she wore like a second history. The cream scarf at her throat had a faint scorch mark she refused to cut away. She said it reminded her not to accept comfort too quickly. The town had changed too, though not as gracefully as the trees. Dorian Slate's name appeared in courthouse reports now, no longer on donor plaques. Investigators uncovered the illegal timber cut, the hidden maintenance road, the locked gate, and the private land agreements he had tried to bury beneath charm and charity. His donations had not been kindness. They had been camouflage. But Jonah Brandt, in his final report, refused to let the town pretend one man had carried the whole blame. The forest ranger stood that morning near a folding table of maps, lean and weathered in his blue-gray workshirt and olive vest. His short brown-gray hair was wind-tossed, his face as restrained as ever. He spoke little, but his report had spoken loudly enough. St. Alder's evacuation plan had been outdated. The old cellar had been ignored, maintenance requests had been postponed, warnings had been softened because money was always needed somewhere else first. The town had not lit the match, but it had left dry grass around the door. That truth was harder to applaud, so most people avoided discussing it near the lemonade table. Kara Wynne did not avoid it. She walked the new evacuation route twice before the ceremony began, checking hinges, lights, signage, and clearance with the same severe focus she might give an active fire line. Her brick-red rescue jacket looked newer, though she wore it with the same no-nonsense posture. Her dark hair was tied low, and the fatigue in her angular face had softened into something less lonely. "You're late turning in your training schedule," she told Archer. "I wasn't aware I worked for you." "You don't, yet. I admire your optimism. I admire your ability to misunderstand orders as suggestions." He looked at her. "Was that a job offer?" That was me being polite before Maeve traps you with pie and moral obligation. Archer glanced toward Maeve. Maeve smiled at him with the gentle cruelty of a woman who had indeed brought pie. He looked back at Kara. That is an unfair tactic. It saved 14 children, Kara said. We use what works. The words landed quietly between them. Neither of them smiled then. A little farther away, Elsie Calder stood near the new doorframe holding something against her chest. She was still small, still sharp-eyed, still wearing her faded navy jacket over a pale brick-red sweater. Her chestnut brown hair was tied low but already coming loose in strands around her face. The pale blue ribbon at her wrist had been replaced by a clean one, though she had tied the burned scrap to a page inside her notebook. She came to Archer slowly. For all her courage, she still moved around him sometimes as if both of them were carrying breakable things. I found the last page, she said. Archer looked at the notebook in her hands. It was the same one Briggs had carried out in his teeth. The cover remained scorched along one corner. Some pages smelled faintly of smoke no matter how long Maeve aired them in the sun. Inside were names of children who had lived at St. Alder across decades, arrivals, birthdays, favorite songs, tiny histories rescued from forgetting. Elsie opened to the final page. The handwriting there was not Maeve's. It belonged to children. Some letters were large and crooked, some were careful, some ran downhill. At the top, someone had written, "What the new St. Alder needs." Underneath were suggestions. A bigger library, a real infirmary. Apple trees that do not catch fire, please. A dog bed near every door. A rule that adults must listen the first time. A tunnel with lights. A place for scared kids to breathe. At the bottom in Elsie's handwriting was one more line. A door named for Briggs, so nobody forgets who ran toward the fire. Archer read it once, then again. His throat worked silently. Elsie looked toward Briggs, who was now suffering through Noah adjusting the paper badge for the 4th time. He saved my bag because it smelled like me, didn't he? Yes, Archer said. He didn't know what was inside. No, Elsie nodded slowly. Maybe that makes it better. Archer looked at her. She did not explain, but she did not need to. Briggs had not saved history because history was important. He had saved it because someone was. Sometimes love began there, not with understanding the whole story, but with refusing to let go of what carried a person's scent. Maeve called everyone together after that. The ceremony was small. No stage, no television vans. No polished speeches from people who had not been there. Just children, firefighters, builders, neighbors, Jonah with his maps, Kara with her checklist, Tessa with tissues she claimed were for dust, and Archer standing beside Briggs as if both were ready to flee if anyone became too sentimental. Maeve stepped forward. St. Alder was never only a building, she said. But buildings matter, doors matter, roads matter, plans matter. Love is not enough if we do not give it a safe way out. Her voice trembled once, then steadied. We failed to ask loudly enough. We failed to listen quickly enough. We failed to prepare as if every child here was our own. Today we begin correcting that. Kara lowered her eyes. Jonah folded his map once, very slowly. Archer felt those words settle over everyone like honest ash. Then Maeve turned toward him. Archer Morrow once told me he was only passing through. Archer muttered, I did not say it in front of witnesses. A few people laughed. Maeve continued, merciless as grandmothers and saints. Some people survive war and still do not come home. They stand at the edge of every room ready to leave before anyone can need them too much. Archer stopped breathing for a moment. Maeve's tired, bright eyes softened. But sometimes home is not where we were born. Sometimes home is where someone believes we will come back. Briggs leaned gently against Archer's leg. Not dramatically. Just enough. That nearly undid him. Kara stepped forward with a small wooden plaque. The letters had been carved by a local carpenter and darkened with careful stain. Briggs' door for every child who ran from the fire, and for the dog who ran into it. Noah helped hold one side of the plaque. Elsie held the other. Together, with Tessa guiding the screws and Maeve pretending not to cry, they fixed it beside the new reinforced evacuation door. Briggs watched the entire process solemnly. When the plaque was straight, Noah saluted him. Briggs sneezed. The crowd laughed, and the sound rose into the clear air like birds startled from a field. Afterward, the children were allowed to walk through the new exit route for the first official drill. They went in single file, hands on the rail, emergency lights glowing softly along the reinforced passage. No smoke, no screaming, no burning ceiling. Just children learning that safety could be practiced before terror demanded it. Archer stood at the entrance. Kara handed him the training schedule again. This time he took it. "I'll do 3 mornings a week," he said. Kara raised an eyebrow. "You will do 2 drills a month, 1 terrain class, and seasonal review." "You negotiate like a hostage taker." "I negotiate like a fire captain." Maeve appeared beside them with a slice of pie wrapped in cloth. "And he will come for dinner on Thursdays." Archer looked trapped. Briggs wagged his tail once. Traitor, Archer thought, but he did not refuse. Late that afternoon, after the ceremony thinned and the children returned to the temporary house, Archer remained near the old apple tree at the edge of the site. Most of its branches were blackened. Half the trunk had been scarred open by fire, but near the base, a small green shoot had pushed through. Briggs limped to his side and sat. Archer rested one hand on the dog's head. For years he had believed healing meant silence. No memories, no dreams, no names rising from smoke. But the fire had taught him something harsher and kinder. Healing was not forgetting. Healing was remembering without letting the memory become a locked room. He thought of Evan Rusk and did not hear only the order anymore. He heard the trust inside it. He thought of Briggs behind the fire and did not feel only abandonment. He felt the command to carry life forward. Below them, the new door stood open. Children ran through it laughing beneath a sky washed clean by spring rain. The old home was gone. A safer one was rising. And sometimes in a life broken open by loss, the road back was not marked by signs, medals, or maps. Sometimes it was found by 4 ash-covered paws, a stubborn heart, and a door that waited for everyone to come home. In the end, this story reminds us that courage is not always loud. Sometimes courage is a man walking away from the one he loves most because others still need him. Sometimes courage is a dog standing between fire and frightened children, not because he understands glory, but because love has taught him where to stand. And sometimes healing begins when we stop asking why the fire came and start asking what God is trying to rebuild through the ashes. Maybe the miracle was not that Briggs survived. Maybe the miracle was that his loyalty helped Archer come back to life. Maybe it was hidden in every small act of mercy, a child holding another child's hand, a woman counting names through smoke, a rescuer choosing duty when his heart was breaking. God often works that way, not always through thunder in the sky, but through quiet paws on the ground, a door that opens just in time, and a heart that refuses to give up. In our daily lives, we may not face a burning forest, but we all face moments when love asks something difficult from us. We may have to forgive. We may have to stay. We may have to protect someone weaker even when our own hearts are tired. And sometimes the very thing we think will break us becomes the road God uses to bring us home. If this story touched your heart, please share it with someone who needs hope today. Leave a comment and tell us, have you ever seen an animal sense danger? comfort a hurting soul, or become part of a miracle in someone's life. And if you believe stories like this still matter, please subscribe to the channel so we can keep bringing you more stories of courage, loyalty, faith, and healing. May God bless you, protect your home, guide your heart through every fire, and remind you that even in the ashes, He can still open a door.